Hey, this is John Ridley.
And this is Matt Carey, Senior Documentary Editor at Deadline.com.
Matt, I hope you're well and projecting into the future slightly. I hope
crystal ball.
that you're crystal balling it, that you had a wonderful holiday season and that your new year will be off to a good start. In fairness and in full disclosure, we're recording our first episode of the new year as our last episode of the past year. But I wish you the best.
Thank you.
And when this episode drops, I hope that the best has arrived to you.
Yes. And you've given us several days to recover from the festivities of New Year's Eve, if needed. You shall see.
Yeah, laying in my Barca-lounger watching Ryan Seacrest carry on Dick Clark's amazing tradition. Hopefully it won't take too much recovery. But for anybody who does need some recovery, I can't think of a better way than to sit and be thoughtful with some of the documentary shortlisted films. And we're pulling triple duty on today's episode, yes. Matt. We're trying to acknowledge a couple of the feature-length documentaries that we have not covered and doing our best to get to some of the short-form documentaries that we should do a better job of covering, but we certainly want to do everything we can to lift every one of these docs because they're all, honestly, truly amazing.
Yes, our episode's going out on Tuesday, January 6th. It occurred to me that, there are plenty of very interesting January 6th documentaries out there. However, those are not the ones we shall be focusing on. As you say, we've got filmmakers who are honored with being named to the short list, 2 in features, 1 in shorts. We have the director, Ryan White, of Come See Me in the Good Light. He's well known to documentary audiences. Young man, but he's already made 15 documentaries on incredibly wide-ranging topics. This one is about the relationship between Andrea Gibson and Megan Falley. A beautiful love story that was made all the more poignant by Andrea's diagnosis with stage 4 cancer. But as we will discover in our conversation, it's quite a joyous film, surprisingly, and very funny.
Andrea really thinks of poetry as what can I create to give to people. I think that's why it's been more long-lasting.
I grew up in a tiny town in the woods of northern Maine. I didn't know that somebody could grow up and make their living from art.
I wasn't by any means a natural. Was not one of those wow hounds born jaw-dropped. I was tough in the husk, untouched by rain.
And also, speaking of funny and serious, that also very much applies to Coexistence, My Ass. This is a film directed by Amber Ferris, which looks at the Israeli comedian Noam Schuster-Eliassi, who's really quite fascinating. She was raised in a quote-unquote oasis of peace in Israel, only place in Israel, certainly that I'm aware of, that Palestinians and Israeli Jews live together by choice, peacefully, side by side, coexisting. And it's really about a one-woman show that she developed around this. And then certainly events caught up with them in terms of October 7th. And so it's both a serious, but surprisingly, again, funny documentary.
When I tell people, yeah, I'm writing comedy, they're like, what? And then I have to explain. I was at the UN, I was trying to make peace, and I couldn't do it. So now I'm doing it through comedy.
مرحبا كيف حالكم؟ الأجانب رح يفكروا إنه كل العرض رح يكون بالعربي. We're like, who is this tall lady? Is she Iranian? Is she Jewish? Is she Arab? Should I be boycotting this show?
Noam Schuster.
Noam Schuster.
Noam Schuster.
Shalom Noam.
Woo!
And a short documentary too, John.
Yeah, I was going to say, also, Amber Ferris, an amazing director, I had the opportunity to speak with before. But yes, in the shortlist category, again, terrific films that are out there, but one in particular that really piqued my interest. It's called We Were the Scenery. It's directed by Christopher Radcliff, but it's about his writer and producing partner, Kathy Lynn Che's parents, who were refugees during the Vietnam War, ended up in the Philippines, and amazingly enough, were background performers in probably one of the greatest achievements in cinema, Apocalypse Now, and have an incredibly humorous and personal take both on the film, Apocalypse Now, as well as working with Francis Ford Coppola, and equally as important, and perhaps more important, what their lives were like as immigrants and refugees from Vietnam to the Philippines and finally in America. All of these films, as powerful as they are, and as you mentioned, Matt, involve humor and incredibly personal perspectives. Not an easy thing to do in documentaries, but all of these directors and all these teams managed to pull it off.
Yes, and as far as Francis Ford Coppola goes, this is a little bit of a teaser. We're going to learn why the parents of the writer of the film were appalled to see the way in which Francis Ford Coppola eats a mango. We're just going to leave it there, and you got to listen to the episode to find out why. This is one of the great takeaways of the two people, the couple, Vietnamese-American couple who were profiled in that film.
Má không có thích đi đóng phim. Không có ý đi đóng phim.
Thì mình biết là hẳn phim Mỹ thì phải cũng có người đạo diễn rồi đó kia thôi chứ còn. Cũng nhận ra nếu mà gặp ổng thì mình nói tôi biết ông là tôi đặc biệt.
But it's a great conversation, and that will be the third in our series of interviews today. We're going to kick it off with Ryan White, the director of Come See Me in the Good Light. Here now is conversation between myself, John Ridley, and Ryan White.
We are joined by the director of Come See Me in the Good Light, a film that was just shortlisted and is currently up for viewing on Apple TV. I think it used to be Apple TV Plus, but it's Apple TV. We want to welcome to the show Ryan White. Ryan, congratulations first and foremost on the shortlist.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. Excited to chat with you guys.
Well, I have to say, I went back and I read a couple of interviews about how you got involved with this film. And one I saw where you were going back and forth with one of the producers on the film, the comedian Tig Notaro, and you kept saying, you know, one of the things about documentaries is they tend to be very, very serious. Mm-hmm. You were looking for a documentary that led a little bit more with humor, and Tig basically came to you and said, I want to make a poetry cancer film, which on the surface doesn't sound the least bit humorous, but I think you did, I want to say the near impossible in taking a film about something so serious and making it lighthearted in the appropriate ways, ribald in other ways, but more than anything, a real love story. But talk about how when somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want to do a cancer comedy film, how you approach that in any regard.
Yeah, so I go way back with Tig Notaro. I've known her for over a decade. In fact, I was at the Largo Comedy Club here in Los Angeles when Tig did her legendary set of stand-up that really made Tig into a household name about her own cancer diagnosis. I was in that room with like 100 other people. So I have been saying to Tig for over a decade, like, bring me a comedy. I want a straight up comedy documentary. And so when she called a couple years ago and pitched this idea, we were appalled because it just did not sound anything like a comedy. She basically said, listen, one of my lifelong friends of 25 years has stage 4 cancer. They're a poet. They're reaching end of life. And how does that sound as a comedy? So Immediately, Jessica Hargrave, who's my producing partner and has been my best friend since we were little kids, and she's also known Tig for a long time. We were saying to each other, like, oh God, how do we let Tig down gently? How do we tell her this is not a great idea for a documentary? But Tig said, hear me out. It's one of the funniest people I've ever known in my entire life. And, Tig is just as funny in real life as she is up on the stand-up stage. So when someone like her says that, you trust her. And she also said, let me just send you a few of Andrea's performances. And I am not a poetry fan. I'm not a spoken word fan by any means. So I had no idea what Andrea's art form was like until Tig sent these performances. And it blew me away, not just with the poetry, but how it was kind of like poetry meets stand-up comedy, meets performance art and storytelling. And so we were very intrigued enough, at least, that we said to Tig, like, if Andrea wants to meet us, we'll jump on a plane and go meet them. And that's what we did. Like a week later, we were on a flight. We knew nothing about Megan, who's Andrea's partner, now widow. And so we had no idea the love story that the film would become in the end, but we knew we were intrigued enough by what Tig had showed us to at least go meet Andrea.
Well, I was just going to say, you talk about it being a verite documentary, and I read a couple of reviews where, you can be that verite where it's just a fly on the wall and things just sort of happen and you catch it. But there is a real genuine artistry and fluidity to a lot of what's going on. And in many of the interviews, you really talk about your team that was small by necessity, but also trying to film something. And anytime one, is a documentarian or doing news stories and you're inserting yourself into someone's lives, you have to have a very sensitive approach. But you talk about the efforts that you went to make sure that team was consistent, irrespective of where you were filming. And I believe with your sound recordist, getting them there every single time, so that you did have a very familial approach to something that is incredibly personal, but obviously you all wanted to share this with the world.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this is my 15th documentary, so I've done quite a few, and I would say most of them are like very intimate in nature between my crew and the subjects of those films. But this one was on a completely different level. Like it took an extreme intimacy, and to be perfectly honest, like I was very uncomfortable at the beginning of it because I was someone who was not comfortable with the notion of mortality, my own mortality, or any grief that I've really gone through in my life. And I also just felt very, before I met them, I felt like it could be very invasive knowing that this couple was going through something so seemingly tragic, what was coming up, and that I would be entering it as an outsider with the film crew. And that dissipated very quickly. I mean, this is a real testament to who Andrea and Megan are as people, but especially as documentary subjects. The best example of that probably is that day I met them in Colorado when I showed up at their house. That evening, there's a scene in our film that a lot of people call the fingering thumbing scene. It had dinner conversation amongst three lesbian queer people about the sexual act of fingering. That was literally the day I met Andrea and Megan, was that we were shooting that scene. And so I remember Jess and I being behind the camera while that dinner conversation was happening with like huge eyes, looking at each other, being like, this does not normally happen on day one of a documentary. And it's true, we got extremely, extremely close with them extremely fast, to the point Megan likes to joke that Andrea and Megan, after the very first shoot in the hospital parking lot, they were telling all four of us that they loved us, which is not what you not what you learn in documentary 101 in college, to be having an I love you relationship with your subjects. But it really became that very quickly. And John, you brought up my sound recordist. His name's Dave Richards. And we did use him on every shoot because he was so a part of this couple, especially by the end. And when Andrea died in July, And we all saw Andrea in the week leading up to their death. But Dave, my sound recordist, he was the last one there. He was there the day before Andrea died, just laid in bed with Andrea the day before they passed. And then after they died, a couple days later, he flew back just to help Megan around the house with chores and things. And so I don't think that's not to take away from any sound recordist, but I don't think that's the typical role that a sound recordist plays in your subject's life, that they're also the caretaker post grief. But that's how close. I mean, it was just the four of us, as you mentioned, one cinematographer, one sound person, and Jess and myself. And that, I think, was the closeness for this story that it took to tell the story correctly.
I think one of the most poignant things for me about the film is a paradox in the sense that Andrea talks about being, quite depressed before her, I think for a long time before her cancer diagnosis, and having some suicidal ideation. And then, I mean, it's really extraordinary to think in that process of, after being diagnosed with what appeared to be terminal cancer, that she found a way to embrace life. And I suspect that maybe that does happen in some cases, but it's a remarkable thing to think about, of that is what it took to switch something in her thinking. And you really explore that in the film.
It was one of the things that really drew me to the film, was that sort of, because from the outside, it almost felt like this like dark irony that someone would be so depressed and suicidal their whole life, and then upon a terminal diagnosis, suddenly see the beauty in life. It almost seemed twisted in a way. And then once we were around Andrea, like, you just understood. It felt like being like, whenever I was around them, I felt like I was having a sort of enlightenment, or being awakened in a way to my own life that had never happened previously. Like, Jess and I would fly back from Colorado, and we would just feel so alive, like high on life, coming back from it. And, many times, because it's not easy being a documentary subject, especially when one of you is nearing end of life. And Andrea and I just had to be very, very open with one another about everything from the very beginning. And so we would often talk about this, and I would say it often to Andrea, like, why are you doing this when it could be your final weeks or months, or ended up being a year that we had with Andrea. And Andrea would always say, like, don't let what happened to me happen to you. Don't let it be that moment you find out you're dying, or your life is flashing before your eyes, and you have all these regrets of not seeing the beauty in your life, or not savoring those relationships that you have in your life. And so I think a big part, because they're an artist and sort of have a philosopher's brain, in being so vulnerable and allowing a film crew into this process, was to try to spread that message for others. Like, listen, I didn't understand the beauty in life until it was almost too late. Maybe by sharing my story, other people will be awakened before it is too late.
And speaking of, the title comes from a line from Andrea's poem by Andrea. And we also want to congratulate you on Best Original Song, because you are also shortlisted in that category. It's always a very competitive category. And that's a song that also comes from poetry written by Andrea. And I guess the song is co-written by Sara Bareilles and Brandi Carlile. So that is an amazing story in and of itself, for Andrea posthumously to be recognized with a shortlist.
Yeah, we Andrea and I talked about that from the beginning. So there's a few poems in the film that are kind of like original poems that Andrea wrote specifically. I wouldn't say for the film, but they wrote them while we were making the film. And so there's a few of them in the film, but always from the very beginning, our sort of vision as two artists collaborating, like a filmmaker and a poet collaborating, was that the the movie would end with an Andrea original poem that was kind of their final thoughts for the audience. And I guess I should say that we all assumed from the beginning of this film that it would be an end of life film and that the film would end with Andrea final breath or dead in some way, which it did not in the end for people that have seen the film. Like Andrea does not die. In my movie, they died 6 months after our film premiered. And so we would talk a lot about what we wanted that final message for the audience to be. We didn't know that Brandi Carlile and Sara Bareilles were going to end up joining our team as executive producers. They just both individually, they both happen to be huge Andrea Gibson fans. I mean, that's how we funded this entire film, was through basically, Tig calls them the lesbians, even though Sarah's not a lesbian. She's an honorary. And Kevin Nealon is one of our executive producers, which is perhaps the most random name on there. But he ran into Tig on the streets of Larchmont, and Kevin's wife, Susan Yeagley, is a massive Andrea Gibson fan. And so they joined this little family. So Sara and Brandi both happened to join our team to help reach the finish line of this film. And they offered, basically, they said, if we've always wanted to collaborate with Andrea, we've just felt too sheepish to ever reach out to them. But if they would want to write a song with us, we would love to do that and perform it. So that was an incredibly fun collaborative process at the end of the film of Andrea handing over this poetry to them and them turning it into this song that's a duet between the two of them.
Yeah, as I want to bring it back to, because obviously we're talking about cancer and end of life, but how much humor there is in this film, whether it's Andrea talking about how few words she has. There's, I think they talk about one of her first editors said all of your poems are the same words, just put in different fashion over and over again. There's a moment when they're outside the hospital and it's off camera, but I believe it's a dude who says, you look extraordinary. And they just say, guys always are just after me, moment by moment. Again, it's just such an affirmation of life and of living. And I appreciated that they said, and I don't know whether I hesitate to say that I'm an artist, but I work in a space where I think about my mortality. And I think some of the reasons that we go into this is because we want to live forever. But I appreciated that sometimes we all need to be reminded that if it's about public perception or anything, we are missing these moments. And I really want for people who are hearing this conversation to know this is not a film you just got to strap in and go, well, dutifully, I need to watch it. It's so enjoyable and so beautiful and so moving. And yes, you talk about the fingering and thumbing, but I think that's going to go down in the annals of documentaries as, one of those moments. I talked about Harlan County, USA, that moment where you see the gun thug pulling out the gun and it sticks with you. That's going to be a moment that I think endures. And I think that's really what I hope that people who have not seen this documentary go into it. You're going to come out of it feeling so much better about life and about artistry and getting to know someone in Andrea that I knew nothing about, but yeah, poetry is for the people.
Well, thank you for saying that, John. I really, really appreciate it. I think our biggest challenge with this film from the very beginning, it's why Jess and I were trying to figure out a way to let Tig down gently from the beginning. Our biggest challenge, even in our own hearts, has been it is an uphill battle to get people to want to watch a poetry cancer film. And I get it. It is like a high barrier of entry. It sounds like the saddest, most depressing story in the world. And so whenever I'm in person and introducing the film, I'm always trying to say, like, this is supposed to be funny. You have permission to laugh. And it is mostly a love story. And to me, it's one of like a love story for the ages. I feel so privileged to have gotten to live inside of this relationship for the last couple years, because it was so beautiful watching that love story evolve and still evolve, even though Andrea is not on this earth with us anymore. But it is, I think it's like a bitter, it sounds like a bitter pill for people before the film.
No. Yeah.
And so that's been our big challenge. So I really, really appreciate you telling people that, because I get it. I get it, man.
Well, thank you again, Brian. And just note that the film has won many, many awards around the world, including at Sundance, where it premiered and won the Festival Favorite Award, which is voted on by attendees among all the films, nonfiction, fiction. That's just one of many of the honors the film has received. So thank you again so much.
No, thank you guys for having me. It was my pleasure.
Absolutely. And best of luck in the coming days.
Thank you.
John Ryan White really become a tremendous fixture in documentary, and I am just astounded at his range, because he's directed films about Pamela Anderson, about Dr. Ruth. He's done some work in the true crime space. He directed Good Night Oppy, which was about the Mars rover. I mean, and they're all very impressive. He's a really talented storyteller. And speaking of talent in the space of documentary, I know you very familiar with the work of Amber Ferris, whose latest film, Coexistence My Ass, also was shortlisted.
Yeah, Amber directed a film a few years ago called Speed Sisters, and it was about 4 young ladies who were Palestinians in Gaza who become short track race drivers. It's an amazing film. Love to talk about that more. But for the moment, I'm going to hope people can go find that, because we do want to talk about Coexistence My Ass. And this is a film that is centered around Noam Schuster-Eliassi, who is to say that she's a comedian sort of sells it short.
Yes.
She is certainly a performer, but uses humor, as humor can be used in the best possible ways, to really pick apart the idea that Israelis and Palestinians can coexist when one side is largely an oppressor and the other side is largely oppressed. As you mentioned, she grew up in an environment, a quote-unquote peace village, where people lived together and laughed together and grew together, and really is trying to use humor and satire to bring folks together, to break down these barriers, and realize that as long as hypocrisy exists, then coexistence can't. So here's our conversation with Amber Ferris, the director, and Noam Schuster-Eliassi, the subject of the shortlisted documentary, Coexistence My Ass. Amber, it's very good to see you again. Welcome to the show. And Noam, it's so good to meet you. Congratulations to you both, first and foremost on the film, but also on making the shortlist. Quite an achievement. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes, congratulations.
You know, I said to Matt Carey, and I do sort of a side list of films documentaries that I really, really love, but I'm sort of worried they're not quite going to make it. I almost put you on that list, and Matt will tell you, if you go on the list of my favorites, you often don't make the short list. Congratulations on making it, despite my feelings. But what I thought was maybe, I don't want to say going to hurt the film, you take an incredibly serious subject matter and you embrace Noam's, your humor, your satire, and really your experience, Noam, and I'll let you talk about it, living coexistence, and then being able to say to so many people, it's one thing to talk about coexistence, it's another thing to really commit to it. So I would love for you to talk about, Amber, how you met Noam, how you became familiar with your story, and also just embracing the sense that sometimes it takes humor for people to really see the hypocrisy of what's going on in the Middle East and in this area. So please, Amber, if you could talk about how you came to Noam and this choice to really embrace humor.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I scouted her out from, all of these, but actually we were friends. We actually met each other while I was making Speed Sisters while I was living in Ramallah. So they often say make films of things that are close to you. And that's what I did. It was, Noam we were both living in the Middle East at the same time. And I left and I moved to New York. And a few years later, Noam was coming to the States for an internship at a fellowship at the Peace and Divinity School at Harvard. And we reconnected, and I was asking her what she was up to. And she said she was doing this one-woman show called Coexistence My Ass. And I've made films about the region, and I know Noam, I knew where she was from, and I just thought that it was just such an interesting way to sort of get at this issue. And I picked up a camera, and the next weekend went and hung out with her in Boston, and that was in November of 2019, and that's when it all started.
Yeah, so this is a 5-year project, and you picked the best 5 years. COVID being in the middle of it, but you managed to get it done. Noam, I'm curious for you. You have this spirit all the way through, where you are laughing at certainly not the situation, but again, to me, a lot of the hypocrisy. I'm curious how you keep that humor, and certainly there are moments in the film where you're incredibly serious, but keeping that humor despite everything, or in spite of everything that is going on, unfortunately, and continues to go on currently with some call it a war, some call it many other things, genocide, that's going on right now in the Middle East.
Yeah, I mean, you're right about saying that, Amber chose some 5 years to document me, and I think I learned so much about documentary filmmaking as a subject of one. And, I mean, those 5 years, they're not like my 5 years. Every single person that is watching this film globally, and we've had this across the board, is watching, me go through the rise of fascism, COVID, what's happening in Israel, Palestine, the escalation, all the way leading up to the genocide. And they see something that they also went through. So I'm very, very, very aware that this film, it's my story, but people are watching these extreme 5 years through my story and are connecting with it through their conversations with their families, through what they have been through in COVID, through what they're seeing happening in Israel, Palestine, and the implications on their homes and their origin country. We've seen this in Poland, we've seen this in Canada, we've seen it everywhere where the film was screening. People were taking it to their own context and what they were going through. And to answer your question, one of the things that I'm so proud of in this film, and I knew, like when I said yes to Amber, it's sort of like a marriage. I said yes to Amber. I knew that it's going to capture the humor, but never to let go from, the urgent political matter that is fueling my comedy. It's never disconnected. And I hope that it will never, ever be disconnected. Even now, when I'm doing shows, here in front of local audiences that are in deep grief and have been through like really, really, really violent something years, I'm very aware that it's hard to make people laugh, but people urgently need it. And they need it also as a form of coming together and making this laughter radical about things that, that we care about. Because let's be honest, in the past 2.5 years, especially, we've been betrayed by comedians who helped fascists like Trump get elected on their podcasts. I've heard Israeli comedians here in Israel making fun of starving Gazans through their jokes on stage. And so restoring that politically and humor-wise, it's my mission now, more than ever.
It's interesting you talk about that, because George Carlin, people would ask George Carlin about, well, what's appropriate in humor? When are you supporting and when are you denigrating? And he would say, a comedian always punches up. And the minute you're punching down, you're oppressing. And that, to me, is the dividing. If you're punching up, because that means you can take a hit from an 800-pound gorilla, versus folks who need that help up. And that's the difference. And Noam, this isn't just something that you talk about. This was your life. Talk about early on, you grew up in a space where people were dedicated to different individuals coming together, living together, and understanding each other to the point you're like multilingual on top of being hugely funny, right? You talk the talk in many languages.
The film definitely deals with this as well. I grew up very differently from the way most Israelis, unfortunately, grow up. And my parents raised me and my brother in the only community where Jews and Palestinians choose to live together. So from a very, very, very young age, from the age of 7, and I basically live in a community where, my neighbors, educators, teachers, best friends are Palestinian. And this thing that is so abnormal to grow up with as a Jewish, girl growing up is becoming so normal to me that even in my extended family, they're coming over to visit and they're like, "What? You're speaking Arabic? Your your best friend is Palestinian." They're even to my close environment. What is so normal to me, it's like we say in the film, it's like science fiction to the rest of the world. And I'm always and I always have this perspective that I always have to keep in mind that the most normal things to me, like knowing the Palestinian history, knowing what happened in 1948, like the history here, the alternative history that Israelis don't know and don't have access to, or are denying and are blinded to and don't want to see. It is something that is so deeply like part of my identity that sometimes I have to remind myself that what is really, really, really just basic level to me and bare minimum to me, to other people, it's like, oh my God. Yeah. And so I think that it brings us also, I think, Amber, like when we talk about the even the title of the film, people are like, Coexistence, my ass. Wait, so you're against coexistence? And I'm like, no, I'm coming from within the peace camp in Israel, grew up within the peace camp in Israel, was really heavily educated and part of this like attempt to create this like kumbaya. And I'm coming with heavy criticism towards this industry that has now, fast forward to 2025, but also when we started filming, miserably failed. And what does it mean that it failed so miserably? And how I, as a comedian who grew up there, how do I deal with it? And how do I make it funny and make people listen and make people think? And also expose to people like how I grew up, like, because I don't see it as something extraordinary. I do not see it as something extraordinary. It should be, it could have been so ordinary. And the fact that my story is considered extraordinary, it's part of my joke.
Amber, you mentioned the fellowship that Noam did at Harvard, and that was sort of the origin of her one-woman show. I think you do the miraculous in your film, and that there's a lot of the one-woman show in there, but you're weaving all this history, what is happening in Israel, and a lot of verite footage. That strikes me as very, very difficult to do as a director. How were you able to weave them all together so that they work as one cohesive whole?
Yeah. I had the idea very early on that I wanted to use the one woman show as like the narrative spine through the film, that we actually didn't actually shoot as any interviews at all. Like we were really committed to having that. And then, I really had an amazing team working with me on this. We had Rachel Leah Jones, who is an amazing director based in Israel, and then Rabab Haj Yahya, who is a Palestinian citizen of Israel, who actually edited my first film, Speed Sisters. And both of these women speak, all three languages. They have such deep knowledge of the region that, it was really a very collaborative effort between the three of us to be able to bring in all of this footage and sort of map out how we were going to tell the story. But at the end of the day, we filmed up until really the end of 2024, and the actual show itself we shot in Montreal in September of 2024. And so, a lot of the jokes were jokes that Noam had performed, throughout the 5 years. Some of them were newer ones that she created specifically for the film. But really, the ending of the film, really when the comedy falls away, and it's really more of Noam's experience of October 7th, and then really like how she wraps up the entire film. That was written pretty much the night before I think we performed it. And that and when she performed that for the first time in front of a live audience, like you could hear like a pin drop. Like that's when I could feel it in my bones. Like I really knew that we had, the ending to the film, and that it was something incredibly powerful.
One of the things that Noam says towards the end, which I think is really vital, is really digging very deep into this notion of coexistence. What does it mean? Does it mean coexistence on the terms of the Israeli government? And you say, no, I'm in a coexistence cannot happen between the oppressor and the oppressed, which I think is an absolutely essential observation. Because to say, hey, let's all live together, you cannot under those terms.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I mean, I didn't think in my comedy show outside of the film, I didn't think that I'll be standing on stage and like explaining why I named this show Coexistence, my ass. But in the film, it is so important because, there is such simple truth to what it is we are trying to convey. Me through my comedy, this film, through the entirety of the film. And it's something that is so simple to think about. When you think about it, it is really so simple. There is no problem with coexistence. Coexistence is a wonderful thing. It is the ideal that we all want. But the fact of the matter is, when you live here and you see how asymmetric the situation is, and you see how Palestinians are living under, Israeli oppression, and then you hear the word coexistence, it is so essential to break it down. Because really, I get people saying like, why are you making so much fun of, what's the problem with coexistence? I'm like, coexistence can be a side effect. It can be, a sweet taste to something, like an aftertaste of something after we've worked very, very, very hard to achieve it. And this work as an Israeli Jew has to be done. When I'm speaking, I'm not speaking on behalf of Palestinians, and I'm not a Palestinian. I am speaking to, my privilege. As an Israeli Jew, I have more privileges than Palestinians. In Israel, being an Israeli Jew, inherently, I have more rights than my Palestinian friends. Therefore, I have more responsibility. I have more privilege. What is my responsibility? What it is that I'm saying? What it is that my actions are like? What does it represent? What model? What kind of an alternative am I modeling? And I think that breaking down this issue of coexistence, especially towards people that also have this a privilege that are watching the film, it is really important. We, now I'm here and we have like kind of a beginning of and very limited screenings locally, and the screenings
in Israel,
and Palestine also.
Oh, all right.
And the audiences are very mixed, and you see the reactions, and it is so wildly, it's so deep to screen this film in front of local audiences. If we had another hour, I could go into it.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Well, I do think that's one of the things that I truly, and not just me, I mean, clearly the doc branch and all those who are responsible for shortlisting you see that. Matt and I see so many serious films every year. Obviously, nothing wrong with that. To put people within an environment and let them witness what folks are going through in war and distress and those many things. But it's rare, again, to see individuals who can find humor, who can find the irony, who can find the satire and deliver it. I was pleasantly surprised, Noam, when I saw that from you. Amber, I don't want to say that I was surprised, but again, as someone who loves Speed Sisters, when I saw it, using another format in that film, it was, young ladies racing, but having to do it in short tracks, because when you're in Gaza, where are you going to go? You don't have long tracks. I commend you for being able to take these subject matters that, as you say, are difficult for the rest of the audience to watch and say, hey, no, you're just watching comedy. You're just watching ladies racing. But there's obviously so much deeper. I feel like the film is necessary. I can't imagine how we get back, or how anyone gets back to the concept of coexistence after what's happened over the last 2 years. But I think if there are not the individuals who are trying to do it, it's never going to happen. For anyone who's listening who has not had the opportunity to see this film, Coexistence, My Ass, I hope you see it. Not just to vote on it, but to internalize it and go out and actually vote with your voices, vote with who you are, because I think this is one of those rare films. It's more than just about winning an award. It's about really changing the hearts and minds. To Amber, to Noam, thank you so much for the film. Thank you so much for joining us. And congratulations. And I hate to say the best of luck because you've accomplished so much already. But best of success in this area, because whatever else happens with the film is just going to elevate it. Thank you to both of you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
John, one of the remarkable things about Coexistence My Ass is it made the shortlist without having any U.S. distribution, which is really very, very difficult to do. And I know both Amber and Noam really went around the world to try to let people see this film and have conversations about it. But it really is, the odds are stacked against them to make the shortlist. And fortunately, the doc fans did see the film, did embrace it. And they had their work cut out for them. But also, last year's winner in the Best Documentary Feature category was in a somewhat similar situation, No Other Land. It also did not have U.S. distribution. And one can speculate as to why, say, big streamers better steer clear of this controversial subject matter, even though it's handled certainly very deftly, I think, in the film.
It's a marvelously humorous film. And as we talked about with the director and the subject, it pulls no punches, as you say, when it gets to the end. It's powerful. And what I love and what I appreciate is even though people may want you to not see it, it is being seen and it is being talked about. And it was an honor and a pleasure to have them both on the show. Speaking of honors and pleasures for me, having Christopher Radcliff on the show, he is the director of the short documentary subject, We Were the Scenery. As you'll see in the conversation, and as you know, Matt, when you're talking about films, when you're talking about great filmmakers, and you're talking about films that really shine a light on Asia through people who've been there, who've lived it, and their voices, that's a recipe for me that I love. But man, Christopher Radcliff does an amazing job. It's an incredibly beautiful, funny film. Again, it's about the parents of his producing partner and writer, Kathy Lynn Shea. And as you mentioned, and as you teased, and I don't want to waste any more time because, folks, I know you've stuck around for this. Francis Ford Coppola and a mango. And I just want to say, having come back just recently from Vietnam, best mangoes ever. So here's our conversation with the director of the documentary short subject, We Were the Scenery, and his explanation of how Francis Ford Coppola eats his mangoes. We are joined by the director of the documentary short subject, We Were the Scenery, which was also selected in the 2025 Doc NYC shortlist and also the 2026 Cinema Eye honors. But most importantly, this was just recently shortlisted by the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Christopher Radcliff, welcome to the show. And congratulations on all the shortlists, but also just congratulations on an absolutely terrific and compelling documentary.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Both of you, John, Matt, really appreciate being here. Thank you for watching the film.
Well, I got to tell you, this film involves things that I find absolutely fascinating. I've had a long interest in Asia and Asian politics. Obviously, Apocalypse Now is one of the, in my opinion, greatest achievements in cinema. But this is also, for a short film, it is 14 minutes and 57 seconds long. This is also really an extraordinary film about immigration, about culture, about how we as Americans may see other cultures. But very interestingly, and my favorite part of the documentary is the deconstruction of Apocalypse Now from people who really experienced the war and how they see it. So a lot to talk about, but let's start with this. This is a film that is about and is based on notionally one of the writers of this film, but also a producer, Kathy Lynn Shea, and these are her parents. I'm curious for you how you came to this story, how it came together, and how you put together such, as I said, a really robust film that is 15 minutes long.
Thank you so much. Yeah. As far as how it came together, I first met Kathy in 2018. I was doing an artist residency in Shanghai actually at the time, and Kathy was there visiting a friend who's also in the residency, a poet. And Kathy is a poet by trade. She's a really brilliant poet. Actually, her newest book called Becoming Ghost, which came out this year, was just a National Book Award finalist for poetry. So, and it sort of also is related to the same topic around her parents in Vietnam and Apocalypse Now. And so we met in 2018, and I think it was like our first meeting. We were at dinner, and she knew I was a filmmaker, and she asked me what software I use to write screenplays because she was working on a book of poems about her parents and about film via Apocalypse Now, and she wanted to potentially explore the form of the screenplay as in a playful way in a poem, and that just sort of unlocked this conversation around. She told me about her parents and about their Bareilles refugees who fled from Vietnam to the Philippines, got into a refugee camp there, and while in Manila in the refugee camp, they were basically taken and used as extras in the filming of Apocalypse Now. And, from my perspective as a filmmaker, hearing this from her just randomly at dinner one night, I was like, oh, jaw on the floor. Like, that is so fascinating to me. And my first question, of course, was like, would you ever want to make a movie about this? From a Western context, when we think about the Vietnam War, we picture Apocalypse Now in films like that. So to sort of all of a sudden meet somebody who has access to the perspectives of people like real refugees that were there, both for the real war and then the cinematic version of the war, it just called to be sort of explored via cinema, in a film. And Kathy, of course, her response was, well, that would be amazing, but I'm a poet. I don't know how to make a film. I wouldn't even know how to go about it. And so I was like, I will help you do it.
It's very interesting to me to hear that you started with a poet and that you arrived in a space. I mean, to me, this film is so poetic in its dispensation and the images and the imagery and things that are literally happening in terms of the words, but visually, I don't want to say all over the place, but very experiential. I'm just very curious how you landed on the format and the aesthetic for the film.
The initial seed of the idea was that we would, do the extras commentary, like almost Mystery Science Theater 3000-esque kind of like, let's sit her parents down, have them comment and narrate, because she knew that they're funny and pithy and like really, really entertaining in that way, and they'd be able to give good commentary on the film. So that was sort of like the initial seed. It's like, let's just record them commenting on the film and see what that sort of yields. But that would not be a full movie, obviously. And so like, Kathy shortly thereafter showed me, she was like, oh, I also have like all these home videos that my parents like recorded that her dad recorded after they arrived in America in the 70s and into the 80s and even into the 90s he was recording. So like she sent me sort of a digitized archive of like this mountain of tapes that he had and Super 8 film. And when I saw that, I was just like kind of really struck by how beautiful they were and how talented, without even really wanting to be a filmmaker, being interested in film, how talented her dad was at capturing these images of his family. And so I knew that that the footage, his home video footage, would be situated in a really interesting way alongside Apocalypse Now. Like, and what I found was when we juxtaposed Apocalypse Now with the home videos, that sort of led to a visual manifestation of an idea that I think Kathy and I were really interested in from the very beginning, and that Kathy's always been interested in even in her writing, which is a recentering of the narrative around the film and around sort of like the perspective, taking it out of a Western perspective and recentering it in a more Vietnamese perspective. And so this was literally a way of sort of juxtaposing this Western kind of perspective in Apocalypse Now with the like fully like kind of, immersed perspective of her parents, via their home videos. And so the juxtaposition of those two sets of footage, like Apocalypse Now and the home videos, I was really interested in collapsing them and kind of creating a form of equity between the two. Like one, like the towering kind of achievement of American cinema, and like kind of amateur home video, and just sort of kind of putting them in a way sort of on equal footing in a sense.
You're talking about it being verite, essentially. However, it's a really beautiful shot where you pan from Kathy's mom over to her father, who's in the, she's in one room, the mom, and he's in I think the kitchen. It's like, that's not a typical verite shot, but it's quite beautiful how it really, in cinema language, really takes us to another place. So I just wanted to note that because I love that shot. Another thing I love about the film is how funny it is. If you were to maybe ask people ahead of time, like, and explain the background, they would probably think, oh man, there's going to be fantastic stories about the making of Apocalypse Now. And there are, but it's not what you would expect. And the fact that the both parents are, to this day, are like not making a big deal about it. And one of their chief anecdotes is Francis Ford Coppola, of course, the director of Apocalypse Now, eating a mango in an unusual way.
I love that.
Explain how apparently Francis Ford Coppola ate a mango and why that sort of surprised your two main characters.
Yeah, that is one of the standout, I guess, anecdotes that we ended up capturing from Kathy's parents. And it's interesting the way it came about because, like I said, Kathy has been hearing about the filming of Apocalypse Now and her parents' experience on that film set since she was a child, right? So it's well-worn territory for her. So she had, when we went into the interview with Kathy's parents, like Kathy had a set of questions that she was curious to ask them. And I also had a set of questions that from a total sort of objective outsider perspective, as somebody that is more sort of attuned to like film history, I suppose, like what I was curious about, to hear their answers to. And one of my questions was like, did they ever meet Coppola? Did they ever speak to Coppola? Did they ever interact with him in any way? Just out of curiosity. And they never really had any real one-on-one interactions with him, but that was like the most vivid thing that they still remember. Like all these years later, they remember seeing him walking around carrying a mango and biting into it without peeling it, and just being so like so from a Vietnamese perspective, like so appalled that anybody would ever do that. Like not even just appalled, but just like not understand, like deeply confused, like why would he do that? And also like it wouldn't taste good, so why would you keep doing it? You know what I mean? And so it just sort of came out naturally that happened to be the way they remember him, in their experience. And in a way, like, it's a funny anecdote, but it also kind of like signals like a little bit of like, in a gentle way, like the underlying kind of like dynamic that was going on about like an American production, reframing the Vietnam War in the Philippines and sort of doing it from this Western perspective, whilst, the actual refugees were sitting there in the background, you know what I mean? So there's like this kind of like, there's this way in which it is a little bit of a microcosm to sort of explore this sort of like, Western imperialist kind of like point of view coming into a space that it may or may not fully understand.
Well, there's another, just a quick touch I would mention because they think it's lovely, but at one point they, I'm not sure if it's mom or dad, picks out this VHS, which has Apocalypse Now on it. And the way that apocalypse is spelled, APPOCLIPS. And it's kind of poignant. Like, yes, if you are in English, it's not your native language. That's probably how, it's probably how a lot of people who were raised speaking English would write it, but it's a lovely touch.
Thank you. I'm so glad you noticed that. That was like really special to me, actually, when I saw that. There was just something about it that I found very, very special and endearing. And that, they're all, it sort of aligns with the fact that their only copy of Apocalypse Now that they still watch is the VHS that they recorded off local television in Los Angeles in the like early 90s or whatever. So it has still all the commercials from that time and like everything. And they do put it in every now and then and watch it and reminisce and stuff like that. And so like, to me, it's like a little bit of, it kind of is like in this furtherance of like, kind of like the humbling perspective that they offer, like we revere Apocalypse Now. We revere this production, the lore behind the production. But for them, it's like just another like small chapter in their lives. I wanted them to tell their story in their own voice. So the misspellings and sort of the VHS copy, that's the version of the film that I wanted to showcase, not sort of like the 4K Redux or anything like that. Like it really is like, though it's in that sense, I really wanted to try to immerse in their perspective.
You know, it really is a very, very funny film. And there are moments, you know, when the parents are saying, yeah, the action was okay, but the rest of it, it's just kind of mediocre. It's very funny, but I will say this. I also really appreciated that there are moments where they talk about, I think, you know, you talk about war, and I'm sure this is true in almost any war, but certainly in Vietnam, that there were so many civilians that were caught up. You know, this was a war among, you know, this wasn't just America versus North Vietnamese. It was America, it was ARVN, it was the Viet Cong, and it was the North Vietnamese. And talking in one moment where the father is shot in the head, and he talks about a bullet going through his helmet in the plastic, but still got away. There's a moment where the mother is saying, you know, we weren't really afraid until the Americans came and the bombs started coming. That's where we got scared. So at the top of this, I said, look, in 14 minutes and 57 seconds, and this I'm sure is true with almost any short form documentary, but I marveled at how much you got in and how gentle the power of the film was. And more than anything, I hope that people watch this film for all of these elements. It's beautiful. It is so funny. It's amazing if you, and we have done, Matt and I have done, I don't know how many conversations about Apocalypse Now just in this very year, or Mr. Coppola, but it is an amazing film. But to see it from the perspective of those who lived through the war, who survived it, who were part of it, but also, you know, the father talking about how he was able to measure in the sea, how they traveled. And he talks about other more skilled sailors wouldn't be able to figure this out. It's an extraordinary film. It really, really is. I hope that people will seek it out. Right now, it is available on the Criterion channel, our very, very good friends. Also, it's a Vimeo staff pick, and it's on Short of the Week. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but I hope people will find it. But there are ways to see it. There are ways to see it, what I'm saying, so that I hope that people will take the time, whether you're a lover of film history, but certainly of the consequences of war, and an amazing family story. And I will say this again, so beautifully constructed. It is amazing. Congratulations to you, Christopher. Best of luck on this documentary, and congratulations for making the shortlist. It's an extraordinary film, irrespective of how others may choose to reward it going forward.
Oh my God. Thank you so much, John. To hear that really means a lot. And I'll just say, like, you know, one of the things that Kathy has always said in her poetry, and as we've made this film, is that one of the ways she sees it is as something of a restorative archive, right? In the sense that, you know, she's interested in sort of creating a more complex understanding of the Vietnamese people, and not just sort of flattening them to images of trauma and war. So in that sense, it was very important to her for the film to be funny, but also not to shy away from the realities of war, but also to show sort of their joy and humor at the same time, to allow for this complex sort of three-dimensional sort of vision of them as real people and not just sort of like vehicles for trauma. So I'm really, really, you know, it's really lovely to hear that you recognized all that in the film. And I really thank you guys both so much.
Can I say also very quickly, since we're talking about our good friends at the Criterion channel, I don't know if all the films are still up, and maybe your short was part of this, but they recently ran a series on films about Vietnam, but that were told more from the perspective of Vietnamese people, true Vietnamese-made films. I saw several of them. They were all extraordinary. So if those films are still up, again, I encourage people to go to Criterion channel to certainly see We Were the Scenery. But while you're there, you make a really terrific point. Seeing films that are outside of the perspective of those of us in the West there's no substitute from seeing films anywhere in the world from those people who actually live it and are bringing their perspective to it. Christopher, again, congratulations on the film. Wishing you the best of success with it. But man, putting it together in and of itself is quite the accomplishment. So congratulations to you and everybody on the team.
Thank you so much.
John, you have been through this before yourself as a member of the Academy and Oscar winner for writing 12 Years a Slave. So you know what it's like for these filmmakers who are desperate. I'm not saying you were desperate to get a nomination. You were very cool about it and winning. Very cool. But all the filmmakers we had on today, I'm sure, are rooting really hard, of course, to get a nomination. It would be the first for all of the filmmakers we spoke with. And we wanted to remind folks, in case they're not aware of the voting window for the documentary branch, which determines the nominees. That is from January 12th to the 15th, so coming up very soon.
Yeah, would love to do more, and especially do more with some of the short-form documentaries. I always feel like, and I know you feel like as well, we want to give as much love and support to all of these filmmakers. As you said, I've been through it before. Fortunately, I never had to go through a short list.
Yes,
which is like an extra step on the, what is it, the 12 or 13 steps up the gallows. But I can say there's probably nothing more special than the positive peer review that you can get from the community. So making that short list, and some of the directors that we've talked with, that is really, really special in and of itself. And again, these documentaries that we've seen and these filmmakers, this is not the last that we're going to hear of them.
No.
These are all some incredibly talented people, and they're going to be in the mix for many, many years to come. So yes, in the upcoming week, we hope to highlight some additional films. And then we've got a lot coming up because Sundance is right behind that. Obviously, the last year in Park City, it's going to be a lot to talk about. So thank you, Matt, as always, for your graciousness. I'm looking forward to another terrific year of Doc Talk. And really, thanks to the community. We literally cannot do it without all these filmmakers. And I have a feeling in the year to come, we're going to have to support documentary storytellers, those who go out and get news as objectively as they possibly can. We're going to need to support these folks more than ever. So I'll be here. I know that you'll be here as well, Matt Carey.
Yes.
Wishing you all the best in the week until we speak again.
Indeed. Thank you, John.
And thanks to our audience. We will see you again on Doc Talk.